There's something that lives beneath us, something that the old maps hint at, that monks whispered about in hidden monasteries, that explorers have been searching for but never quite found. And science. Well, science has been quietly looking the other way. From the frozen edges of Antarctica to the deep caves beneath the Himalayas, there are traces everywhere, if you know where to look. Evidence that the Earth might not be as silent, not as empty as we've always been told. You ever look at those old seismographs, the really, really old ones? They record rhythmic pulses that nobody can explain. Like the planet's got its own heartbeat, and we don't have any idea what's making that sound. And then you start reading the myths. All of them. The Sumerians, Tibet, the Andes. Every single culture that got isolated enough to develop its own beliefs, they all talk about the same thing. A hidden kingdom, a vast civilization that went underground after something catastrophic happened about 12,000 years ago. And maybe, just maybe, their machines never stopped humming. Maybe their archives still whisper through layers of stone that we've never managed to dig through. Tonight, we're going deep. We're going to follow the signals, the legends, and the history that's been buried beneath our feet. Together, we're going to explore what might still be left of humanity's first empire, the one that didn't vanish, but simply withdrew into the silence below. The one that nobody's supposed to find. Back in 1834, something happened that nobody really wanted to talk about. Miners were working near a city called Khabarovsk in eastern Russia. We're talking deep in the wilderness, seriously remote, and they broke through a layer of limestone. Behind that layer, a tunnel. Not a natural cave system, a tunnel. And here's the weird part. The walls were smooth. Not just natural erosion smooth, but carved smooth. Like something with precision tools had cut through the rock without leaving a single mark of a chisel or hammer. No imperfections, no accidents. When you're deep underground, the air should be stale, right? But through this passage, a current of air was actually moving. And it was warm, genuinely warm. Which makes absolutely no sense when you're beneath frozen soil in Siberia. The temperature should be dropping the deeper you go, but it wasn't. It was getting warmer. Now word gets around. This reaches St. Petersburg, and the Imperial Academy sends some of their top geologists to investigate. And you know what they concluded? An illusion. Candlelight playing tricks on the miners' eyes. Case closed, or at least that's what they wanted everyone to believe. But here's where it gets interesting. One of the miners, a man named Ivan Borsk, he couldn't just let it go. He was talking about what he'd actually seen down there. He was describing a massive chamber beyond the tunnel entrance. The kind of space where you could have fit entire buildings. And holding up this chamber metal pillars, real metal holding up a dome made of black stone. He said it looked older than any church he'd ever seen, older than any ruin he'd ever encountered. He was insistent about it, and slowly other reports started trickling in. Fast forward to 1871. French explorers are mapping caverns near the Pyrenees, completely different continent, thousands of miles away, and they claim they find something incredible. Engraved tablets showing entire cities. Not small settlements, but cities that were supposedly connected to each other through underground corridors. The really strange part, the markings on these tablets weren't Latin, they weren't Greek, they weren't Egyptian, nothing that the scholars of that time could identify. There's this linguist, Charles Etienne Long, who gets involved in studying these findings, and he starts suggesting something radical. He says that these markings might be remnants of a civilization that had deliberately retreated into the Earth's crust. He's talking about an age of planetary chaos, like something catastrophic was happening on the surface. But Paris, the academic circles in Paris, basically laughed him out of the room. His theories didn't fit into what the educated elite wanted to believe. But here's the thing. Those drawings he created, spirals, towers, circles nested beneath mountains, they didn't disappear. They showed up later in occult literature. They got passed around in secret societies. And they kept appearing in the margins of books and manuscripts for decades to come. Someone was keeping them alive. Someone thought they were important enough not to forget. So now it's the early 1900s, and a Swedish explorer named Sven Hedin goes to Tibet. He's documenting local legends, talking to monks from the Gelug school, and they keep mentioning this place. They call it Agadi. And according to what they're telling him, this isn't mythology, this is history. They're describing a massive kingdom that exists beneath the surface, and it's supposedly ruled by a lineage that's never died. Never. Thousands of years, and the same family line. According to the text that Hedin collected, this hidden realm wasn't just some fantasy or spiritual metaphor. It was an actual refuge. It was built after a global disaster, the same one the myths all mention, when oceans basically turned to ice and entire continents became desert wastelands. The monks called the ruler of this place the king of the world, and they believed that this figure only revealed himself when surface civilizations were on the brink of collapse. When things were falling apart up here, that's when the king made an appearance. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. The 20th century starts arriving, and suddenly we've got photographs, we've got instruments, we've got ways to measure things. And coincidences start showing up. In 1937, an American geologist named Richard Shaver starts writing letters to Amazing Stories magazine. He's working with welding equipment for his day job when he starts hearing voices. Actual voices. They're describing an ancient empire deep inside the earth. And according to these voices, the machines from this civilization are still running, still operating. After tens of thousands of years, these machines have never stopped. Shaver describes them as remnants of something he calls the elder race. Humans who fled deeper into the planet when the sun became hostile. The whole thing got published as fiction. But Shaver wasn't writing fiction. He was insisting that this was real. And what happened next was wild. Readers started writing back. They were describing the same things. Dreams of enormous subterranean cities glowing with this artificial light. Silent railways running through tunnels made of obsidian, and air that shimmered like heat, except there's no fire anywhere, no flames, just this shimmer. The scientists of the time. They pretty much stayed silent. Some were skeptical, some just didn't engage. But not everyone dismissed it completely. In fact, someone very important was paying attention. Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd, the famous polar explorer, records something in his flight log during Operation High Jump. He's flying over what he shouldn't be flying over, documenting what he shouldn't be documenting. His log mentions something about flying over green land, beyond the ice. And machines, actual machines that could rise vertically from the snow, faster than any aircraft of the time could move. The official report, nothing. Zero mention of it. The admiral died 10 years later, and suddenly His diaries got locked away in naval archives, sealed. But here's what happened next. Handwritten copies started circulating, unsigned, unconfirmed, but they were out there. And secret societies, people interested in this kind of hidden knowledge, they saw those copies as proof, absolute proof that something ancient was still alive, still operating beneath the poles. By the middle of the 20th century, all these pieces start connecting. The Russian tunnels, the Tibetan legends, shavers' voices, birds' flight. Everything suddenly starts looking like a single story, one coherent narrative. Some people started calling it Lemuria. Others said Atlantean Continuum. Some preferred the name Agardic Network. But the idea was consistent. Humanity's first and greatest empire didn't vanish. It retreated. And then it waited. There are maps, old maps, maps that shouldn't exist if history is what we've been told. And when you start looking at them, really examining them, you realize something unsettling. Someone centuries ago knew things about our planet that we're only now confirming with satellites and advanced technology. How is that possible? Let's start with 1513. An Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis completes what becomes one of the most controversial maps in history. This isn't just any map, it's drawn on gazelle skin, hand-signed by the admiral himself. And what it shows is absolutely bizarre. You've got the western coasts of Europe, Africa, rendered with incredible detail, the eastern edges of the Americas, which most of Europe didn't even officially know about yet. But the really weird part, at the bottom of this map, there's an outline of what looks unmistakably like Antarctica. And here's where it gets strange. The detail is extraordinary. We're talking mountains, river deltas, bays, all rendered with a level of precision that cartography wouldn't achieve again for centuries. Centuries. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, when Russian naval officers Fabian Bellingshausen and Mikhail Lazarev encountered the Fimbul ice shelf. That's over 300 years after Piri Reis drew his map. So what was he looking at? The admiral himself left notes in the margins. He says his chart was a composite. He copied it from maps that dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, and also from maps created by the early kings of the sea. His sources, he specifically noted, were ancient. We're not talking about recent sources, we're talking about documents that were already old when he was copying them. Scholars spent decades arguing about this. In the 1950s, a professor named Arlington Mallory proposed something controversial. He suggested that the Antarctic coastline shown on Piri Reis's map wasn't covered in ice at all when the original map was drawn. That would mean the original map had to be created when Antarctica's edges were actually free of glaciers. And geologically, that could have happened more than 6,000 years ago. More than 6,000 years. When Mallory presented his findings to the U.S. Hydrographic Office, a cartographer named Harold Olmers sent back a short response, just a few lines, but the words in that letter have stuck around because they're so unsettling. He wrote, "It is beyond our comprehension how the data on this map can be reconciled with the supposed state of geographic knowledge in 1513. Think about that. A government cartographer essentially saying we have no explanation for how this is possible. The letter got filed away, but copies circulated among researchers who saw it as confirmation, proof that somehow fragments of an older civilization's knowledge had survived all the way into the Renaissance. But Piri Reis wasn't alone, not even close. In 1737, a French geographer named Philippe Bouache presents another map to the Academy of Sciences in Paris. And he's drawn Antarctica again. But his version is even more specific. He's divided the continent into two separate landmasses with a water channel between them. This is detailed. This is intentional. Fast forward to 1958. Seismic surveys are conducted on Antarctica using modern equipment, advanced technology. And you know what they found? Antarctica actually does consist of two main land masses separated by a chain of subglacial mountains. They discovered exactly what Biwachi had drawn in 1737. Using what technology? Using 18th century tools. How does that happen? He claimed his data came from ancient authorities preserved in French archives of exploration. But there's no way to verify that now. The documents have disappeared or been classified or lost to time. What we're left with is a map that shows something that shouldn't have been knowable, something only visible through modern seismic equipment or aerial photography. Even earlier examples exist. There's the Orontius Finaeus map from 1531 found later in the Library of Congress. It portrays Antarctica's rivers and valleys in remarkable proportion. We're talking about accurate latitudes and longitudes that align with modern readings within just a few degrees. A few degrees, not hundreds of miles off. A few degrees. The implication is staggering. Someone long before recorded history had somehow charted the southern pole from above, from a vantage point. An impossible task for any civilization before aircraft or satellites were invented. Now, historians usually explain this away. Lucky guesses, they say. Imaginative composites. Coincidence. But when you start seeing similar anomalies across multiple continents, across centuries of map-making, coincidence starts to feel like a weak explanation. Like you're trying to fit something into a box that's clearly too small. In China's imperial archives, there are maps from the Yuan dynasty that reference inner lands, lands beneath the world's edge. They're marked with circular borders and notations describing warm winds and the absence of stars. That last detail is interesting, right? The absence of stars, like describing an underground world. A 14th century Persian chart found in Tabriz depicts something labeled Bahr al-Zulmat, the Sea of Darkness. And the shapes drawn along its rim, they resemble coastlines. Not random decoration, actual coastlines. Some researchers have proposed something wild. What if these maps weren't of the surface at all? What if they were maps of the interior? What if they represented a forgotten geography that mapped the Earth from within? That's a radical idea, but it would explain why they're accurate for places underground that we're only now discovering with modern technology. In the late 1800s, a German archivist named Karl Unger claimed to have found a parchment in the Vatican Library. This parchment supposedly referenced another continent, and it was supposedly accessible through what it called polar mouths. Openings at the poles. When he tried to show the document, it disappeared, vanished. The only thing that survives is his correspondence with another scholar named Hermann Walter, who published an essay in 1901 titled "The Path in the Earth from Within." Walther wrote something that stuck. The oldest maps are not of the heavens, but of the hollow of the earth, for it was there the first kingdoms stood. When you take modern cartographic analysis and start overlaying these ancient maps digitally, adjusting them for polar shifts and continental variations, something remarkable happens. The features start aligning. Not with the surface geography that was known in the 1500s and 1600s. They start aligning with seismic topography, with what lies beneath the ice. When Peary Race's coastlines are transposed along a rotated globe, they mirror features currently lying 2 kilometers below Antarctica's ice sheet. Valleys that medieval cartographers supposedly drew as errors. They correspond to actual subglacial rifts beneath Queen Maud Land. A 2002 study by cartographer Patrick Hoy found that if you adjust for polar positioning, Peary Race's work aligns terrifyingly well with what we now know exists 2 kilometers underground. Throughout the 20th century, secretive studies continued. The U.S. Air Force ran Operation Deep Freeze missions starting in 1955, conducting radar sweeps of Antarctica's interior. The data was never publicly released, but technicians leaked fragments years later. Those radar echoes showed symmetrical patterns that looked like structures, foundations, possibly remnants of pre-glacial settlements. Official statements called them natural formations, but officials also classified the data and sealed the reports. In South America, Jesuit missionaries in the 1600s brought back sketches from Andean natives. These sketches depicted stairways descending into mountains near Cusco. Stairways connecting lands that were lit from below. When 20th century geological scans were overlaid onto those drawings, they aligned with cave systems extending toward the Nazca Plateau. And in 2017, satellite imagery detected unusual rectangular voids beneath that area, consistent with artificial excavation, according to some analysts. If this knowledge truly survived into early modern Europe, it raises an uncomfortable question. Who preserved it? Libraries were burned, knowledge was lost, but somehow fragments made it through. The Library of Alexandria is often invoked as the great lost repository of ancient wisdom. But maybe its information was dispersed. Maybe it was copied and hidden in navigators' guilds, in royal cartography centers, in secret orders that guarded pre-deluge data. The Knights Templar, for instance, were known to have maps of hidden lands beyond the south. When their archives were seized in 1307, those maps disappeared. Some researchers believe those same documents reappeared centuries later in Venice among materials used by Peary Race when he created his map. In the early 21st century, magnetic mapping revealed more anomalies. Between 2009 and 2013, the European Space Agency's swarm satellites recorded magnetic disturbances beneath Antarctica's Wilkes Land crater. The patterns formed concentric circles more than 250 kilometers wide. A NASA geophysicist named Ralph von Friese noted that such readings could indicate dense metallic structures buried beneath the crust. A massive impact site, perhaps, or something engineered. The data remain unexplained. But when you place that information alongside these ancient maps, the coincidence starts to feel deliberate, intentional, not random. These maps might be fragments of memory, traces of a time when the Earth wasn't seen as a prison of rock, but as a layered world. A world with kingdoms stacked like forgotten pages, one beneath the other. And somehow, someone remembered enough to draw them. Antarctica is the last frontier. It's the one place on Earth where you can still find genuine mystery, genuine isolation. And it's also the place where some of the strangest things have been reported. Official reports, declassified documents. And then there are the things that were never supposed to be documented at all. Let's go back to December 1946. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, one of the most celebrated polar explorers of all time, leads something called Operation High Jump. Officially, it's a scientific mission. They're testing equipment, establishing research bases, gathering data. It sounds routine, Except it wasn't routine, not at all. The scale of this operation was massive. We're talking about 700 men, 13 ships, 33 aircraft. That's not a small expedition. That's a military operation. That's a show of force. And it only lasted 2 months. 2 months, that's it. For all that preparation, all that expense, all those resources, the entire mission was called off after just 60 days. Byrd's personal notes from that time describe regions as green as the Amazon, mountain ranges that weren't supposed to exist. In one entry, he specifically mentions an entrance through the ice shelf, large enough to admit their aircraft. He actually wrote that down. And then the fleet came back. The mission ended. And nobody really explained why. Decades later in the 1990s, Byrd's diary was published posthumously. And in it, he mentions something that sounds almost poetic. He writes about a land beyond the poles, the center of the great unknown. That's how he describes it, not a scientific discovery, not an unexplored territory, the center of the great unknown. Now, Antarctica is protected. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed. It prohibits military activity. It restricts exploration to scientific purposes only. You can't just go down there and do whatever you want anymore. Everything is regulated. Everything is controlled. And certain regions, particularly around Queen Maud Land and Wilkes Land, the satellite imagery appears to have been deliberately blurred or overlaid. These are the exact same regions where anomalies have been recorded, where strange things have been detected. In 2001, a team from the British Antarctic Survey detected something remarkable: an underground lake, more than 3 kilometers beneath the ice. They named it Lake Vostok. Sealed off from the surface for at least 15 million years, completely isolated. But here's where it gets interesting. The radar mapping that followed showed something unexpected. Structures, corridors that looked deliberate, right angles, arches beneath the lake bed. Officially, they were classified as natural ice folds, formation, geological processes. But several technicians at the site reported something different. They said the patterns repeated at exact intervals, perfect intervals, forming grids. And grids like that don't occur in nature. Grids suggest planning, design, intention. When the Russians decided to drill into Lake Vostok in 2012, something happened that nobody fully explains. The borehole was sealed, immediately sealed. The official story was contamination concerns. But unconfirmed transmissions from the site mentioned something else. Pressure changes, unexpected organic readings, like something down there was reacting, responding. The sample cores that they extracted, never released, never studied publicly. Instead, the data were classified, sealed away, and the base remained closed for several seasons. Scientists stationed at nearby outposts were given strict instructions. Don't approach within a 20-kilometer radius. Stay away. Don't ask questions. Other discoveries followed a similar pattern. Silence, classification, then nothing. In 2016, NASA's IceBridge mission recorded heat anomalies beneath the Ross Ice Shelf. Localized zones of warmth, actual heat, in places where the ice should be frozen solid. The reading suggested geothermal activity. But when they looked for volcanic signatures, nothing. No volcanoes. No geological explanation that made sense. Some researchers speculated about vents, geothermal vents, maybe connected to vast subterranean caverns. But that's speculation. What's not speculation is that heat is there. Something is generating that warmth. In 2018, satellite radar detected something enormous, a massive void beneath the Thwaites Glacier, nearly 300 meters tall, the size of Manhattan. And here's the unsettling part. The cavity was described as growing, as if something below was actively consuming the ice from within, creating space, hollowing it out. Early polar explorers left us cryptic accounts. During the 1930s, a British expedition to Graham Land noted whistling winds emanating from ice tunnels that extended for miles inland. The sounds they described mechanical vibrations, not air movement, not the wind. Mechanical vibrations, like something was humming down there. In 1949, a Chilean Air Force pilot named Lieutenant Mario Sepa reported flying over an opening in the ice near the South Magnetic Pole, an oval opening, and from it he saw fog rising, not steam necessarily, fog, and a faint greenish light emanating from within. His photographs were taken for documentation. They disappeared, never developed, never seen again. Later in 1960, the Argentine Antarctic Institute recorded something strange on their seismographs. Tremors. But not the kind that come from tectonic plates shifting. These tremors had rhythm, pattern. They occurred in regular pulses, every 12 hours. Exactly, like something mechanical, something on a cycle, something operating with precision. A memo written by Dr. Carlos Reyes, one of the lead geophysicists, described it simply as if the continent is breathing. Think about that. The continent is breathing. Not earthquakes, not volcanic activity, something breathing, something alive, something conscious. The theories vary wildly. Some physicists suggest that deep geological layers might act as resonant chambers, amplifying electromagnetic feedback from the planet's core. Others propose that these signals are remnants of an ancient energy network. Machines buried long before human civilization, still drawing power from geothermal flows deep beneath the surface. A few researchers, the ones who speak quietly off the record, they believe these systems were constructed by the same pre-cataclysmic empire mentioned in the myths of Agatha and Shambhala, designed to stabilize the Earth's magnetic field after a cosmic event disrupted everything. Declassified files from the 1960s reference something called Operation Teal'dine, a joint Soviet-American project. Both superpowers working together, placing resonance sensors across the Pacific Rim. The official goal: monitor seismic activity. The unofficial goal: both sides were testing whether the Earth's crust was transmitting controlled frequencies. A surviving diagram from 1967 shows transmission points aligned with known fault lines. The San Andreas Tonga, the Himalayas. They're forming a global lattice, a network. The records stop abruptly after 1971. Nobody explains why. Modern radar technology has revealed even more. Linear formations beneath Antarctica's surface. Tunnels, essentially. In 2019, data released by the European Space Agency suggested voids stretching for hundreds of kilometers under the continent's crust. Their uniform width, approximately 300 meters, doesn't match known geological fractures. Natural formations don't create perfectly uniform passages. Not like this. At certain intervals, faint magnetic emissions have been detected from these regions. signals pulsing with mathematical precision. Amateur radio operators in the 1990s recorded sequences of bursts, short, evenly spaced, each lasting exactly 15 seconds, transmitted at a frequency that doesn't match any known communication system. The source appeared to be beneath the Antarctic Circle. The data were later labeled as atmospheric anomalies, classified, dismissed. But governments have shown interest, quiet interest. The United States established a permanent research base at the South Pole in 1957, equipped with advanced radar, advanced seismic instruments. The official mission is climate study, but many of its readings remain classified, still secret. In 2018, satellite images captured something remarkable: a column of steam rising from a fissure near Mount Erebus, followed by weeks of radio silence from nearby observation posts. When communication resumed, no mention was made of the event, like it never happened. In 2020, European scientists studying neutrino emissions from deep ice detected something that shouldn't exist. Unexplained particles, cosmic rays traveling upward, moving opposite to the expected direction, as if something beneath the Earth was producing them. Dr. Derek Fox of Pennsylvania State University made a statement about it. Then he retracted it. But the measurements remain on record, documented, undeniable. Some geologists argue that these gates aren't literal openings. They're zones where the Earth's magnetic field interacts with the atmosphere in unusual ways, allowing glimpses into what lies beneath. Others believe they're actual sealed entrances, remnants of ancient technology, dormant, waiting, humming faintly under kilometers of ice. Old Tibetan writings describe entrances that only appear when the breath of the world warms the white shell. Antarctica continues to hold its silence. Its airspace remains heavily regulated, its satellite imaging controlled. The ice conceals more than cold. It hides time itself, layered in white walls that grow thicker with every century. Somewhere under that frozen expanse, perhaps near Lake Vostok or Queen Maud, land gates might rest, closed, humming faintly, waiting for warmth, waiting for someone to listen. There's an idea that's been floating around for centuries, an idea that most people dismiss immediately without even thinking about it. But brilliant people have entertained it. Scientists have studied it. Explorers have dedicated their lives to testing it. And the more you look at the evidence they left behind, the harder it becomes to dismiss entirely. The idea is simple. What if the Earth isn't solid? What if it's hollow? In 1692, an English astronomer named Edmund Halley, yes, the same Halley who has a comet named after him, he proposed something radical. He suggested that Earth wasn't a solid sphere at all. Instead, it was a series of concentric shells, nested inside each other like Russian dolls. And between these shells, vast hollow spaces, empty spaces. And potentially he thought these inner spaces might even sustain life. They might have their own light sources. Halley's reasoning was based on something concrete. He'd noticed irregularities in compass readings, magnetic variations that didn't match what you'd expect from a solid, uniformly magnetized sphere. He theorized that these variations could only be explained if there were multiple magnetic poles rotating within the planet, multiple centers of magnetism, nested inside each other. In his time, this wasn't treated as fantasy. This was serious science. This was a legitimate hypothesis being discussed by educated people. Over the next 100 years, other researchers refined the idea. They questioned it. Some quietly adopted it as truth. Then Pierre Bouguer entered the picture. A French naturalist in 1735, he's measuring gravity in the Andes Mountains, taking measurements, recording data, and he notices something peculiar. The Earth seems less dense than it should be. The gravitational pull doesn't match what the math predicts. And you know what, his data, whether he intended it or not, aligned perfectly with Halley's claim. Empty chambers inside the crust could explain why the Earth weighs less than it should. By the late 1700s, even Isaac Newton's followers were debating this. Was gravity alone enough to explain the planet's internal structure? If the Earth was hollow, as Halley proposed, then the inner surface might host an entire world, lit, inhabited, sealed completely from ours. But the real turning point came in 1818. An American Army officer named John Cleves Simmes Jr. decided to take this theory public. He distributed circulars across the United States. Bold circulars. He declared that the Earth is hollow and habitable in Zid. He wrote it out plainly. I declare the Earth is hollow and habitable within containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles. Open at the poles, that's the key claim. He believed there were actual openings, passages, located at the north and south poles where you could potentially access the interior. Simmes petitioned Congress. He asked for funding to mount an expedition to the North Pole to find these openings. To prove it, Congress said no. But the idea captured people's imaginations. Newspapers mocked him, sure, but he had followers. People called themselves Cimmerians. They spread his vision, inner continents, temperate climates, ancient civilizations thriving beneath the Arctic ice. One of Simmes' students, a man named Jeremiah Reynolds, he carried the torch. In 1829, Reynolds managed to persuade President Andrew Jackson to authorize a naval exploration toward the South Pole. He stood before Congress and spoke directly to them. He said, "There are lands within the hollow of the world, and knowledge sleeps there." Knowledge sleeps there. That's poetic. That's also strangely specific. The expedition was delayed, but eventually it set sail in 1838 as the United States Exploring Expedition under Charles Wilkes. Officially, it charted Pacific Islands and portions of Antarctica, scientific mission, documented discoveries. But in Reynolds's private notes, the ones recovered later by historian Richard Ellis, there are mentions of things that didn't make the official report. He writes about unusual magnetic stillness near the 70th parallel, and a glow upon the horizon, without a sun, a glow in the sky, no visible source. As exploration advanced through the 19th century, new instruments came into play, better tools, more precise measurements, and the mystery deepened rather than resolved. In 1869, a German scientist named Hermann Platzmann published a book called The Living World Within. He presented an argument based on seismic data. He'd been analyzing waves traveling through the Earth, and he noticed something odd. The waves slowed down unexpectedly at certain depths. Slowed down. That suggests low-density regions, large voids, empty spaces. Modern science would later explain those wave reductions through differences in mantle composition, different rock types, different mineral densities. But Platzmann's data became fuel for hollow Earth enthusiasts. His diagrams showed a vast inner ocean, a suspended central sun. These images got reproduced in occult journals from London to Vienna. The idea persisted. It evolved. Then in 1871, something appeared. a self-published book in St. Louis. Etidorpa. Spelled backwards, it's Aphrodite. Its anonymous author, later identified as John Uri Lloyd, he described something fascinating. A man's descent through Kentucky's limestone caves, deep underground, and what he finds, a luminous, subterranean world. Now it was presented as fiction, but it was drawn from real geological surveys of the Mammoth Cave System, one of the largest known cave networks on Earth. Lloyd's descriptions are interesting. Air that glowed softly without any flame, smooth corridors carved by unknown tools. These details match, and I mean match closely, what later explorers claim to have experienced. People who said they'd reached inner chambers beneath the poles. Centuries of explorers separated by time, location, and culture, all describing the same thing. Glowing air, smooth passages, evidence of design. By the turn of the 20th century, Hollow Earth theory was merging with emerging science. In 1913, a Norwegian engineer named Olaf Janssen published The Smoky God. He claimed that he and his father had sailed through an Arctic opening, sailed right into a hidden world, bathed in a dim internal sun. He described cities of marble, advanced technology, beings more than 3 meters tall. Beings, civilization, waiting in need. The book was widely dismissed as fantasy. But here's what's interesting. Janssen's nautical details were accurate. The latitude he mentioned, wind direction, star positions, all matched real Arctic conditions. He wasn't inventing details randomly. He was describing places he seemingly knew. One particular remark stuck with readers. The compass needle turned restless, as if searching for another world, as if it was aware of another magnetic center, another pole. The fascination with this theory reached into military and scientific institutions during the early 20th century. A German physicist named Hans Horbiger developed what he called the world ice theory. He proposed that ice and hollow space governed the cosmos, not just Earth, the entire cosmos. His ideas inspired secret research projects in Europe during the 1930s and 1940s. Expeditions seeking access points, seeking the entrance to an inner realm. Declassified fragments from Allied archives mention expeditions toward both poles. Various pretexts, meteorological studies, archaeological investigations, magnetic research. Among them was a 1938 German Antarctic expedition that mapped parts of Queen Maud Land. They dropped metallic insignias marking the area, calling it New Schwabenland. New Swabia. Decades later, conspiracy theorists linked these missions to underground facilities supposedly built within the ice, though no credible proof has ever surfaced. In the mid-20th century, the hollow Earth idea resurfaced through a technological lens. An American engineer named Raymond Bernard published The Hollow Earth in 1964. He claimed that both poles were entrances to a vast inner domain, accessible by air. Bernard didn't rely on folklore. He referenced declassified radar anomalies, testimonies from polar pilots who reported openings of unusual geometry. He drew on seismic survey data, atmospheric pressure readings. He suggested that the poles behaved as thin points in the planet's crust, weak points, passages. Even mainstream science occasionally brushed against these questions. In 1970, researchers drilling the Kola super-deep borehole in the Soviet Union found the crust to be thinner than expected, much thinner. And they recorded something strange: sonic reverberations, unexplained sounds echoing up from extreme depths. The official explanation said it was rock fracturing, natural geological noise. But the recordings were strange, deep, resonant, almost rhythmic. Engineers who heard them described them as mechanical in tone, not natural, designed. Those sounds reignited public curiosity. What lies beneath what's down there? Today, seismology gives us detailed models. A molten core instead of a hollow sphere. That's the consensus. That's the accepted science. But certain anomalies persist. Zones of unusually low density beneath the Pacific Ocean. Beneath Africa, vast enough to hold entire continents of material. Geophysicists call them LLSVPs. Large, low shear velocity provinces. Their structure remains poorly understood. Some researchers outside mainstream circles suggest something different. Maybe they're remnants of older shells, hollow spaces long collapsed or filled with material over geological time. Maybe the Earth wasn't always solid. Maybe it was once structured differently. From Halley's first proposal in 1692 to the experiments of the atomic age, humanity's curiosity has always turned inward, toward the center, toward the unknown beneath our feet. The hollow earth theories, whether dismissed or adopted, left behind a legacy. Magnetometers, boreholes, radar pulses pointing toward one persistent question that won't disappear. What exactly lies beneath our feet? Beyond the crust, beneath the silence of stone. The machines might not be myths, they might be real. And if they are, they've been running for a very, very long time. The machines that never stopped. In 1949, near a remote Siberian town called Norilsk, miners began reporting something they couldn't explain. Deep under the permafrost, far from any factory or town, they heard a sound. A low, steady hum. Not like wind, not like water. Mechanical. Like turbines turning in a sealed chamber somewhere below their feet. Soviet engineers were sent to investigate. The first assumption was simple industrial resonance. Maybe the machinery on the surface was sending vibrations down into the rock. But when they shut everything off, when they cut the power, killed the drills, and turned off the engines, the sound kept going. Seismographs in the region picked up faint rhythmic vibrations repeating every 11 seconds. Over and over. A pattern, not random, not chaotic. A pulse. A local newspaper ran a tiny paragraph about it. One brief report. Then the story disappeared from the archives, as if it had never existed. Almost 30 years later, something similar happened again. In 1978, at the Kola super deep borehole in northwestern Russia, engineers were drilling deeper into the earth than anyone had ever gone before. As the borehole passed 12 kilometers, the sensors picked up something strange. Low-frequency vibrations that didn't match known geological activity. The recordings were sent for analysis. At the Pulkovo Observatory, the data showed modulated patterns. It didn't look like random seismic noise. It looked like a pulse. Some researchers suggested it might be harmonics from Earth's rotation or natural resonance. Others pointed out a detail that didn't fit the frequency shifted slightly every few hours. It didn't track with any known planetary cycle. In internal memos, these anomalies got a new name: machine signatures, And this wasn't just happening in one place. In 1982, during oil exploration in Alaska, geophones recorded rhythmic underground sounds again. They resembled the startup of engines. The drilling teams assumed it was feedback from their own rigs. But when they shut the machinery down, the pattern continued. Quiet, but persistent. One engineer, Dennis Klein, described it in his report as a metallic heartbeat that didn't stop. The report was filed, never officially published. Across the planet, deep Earth microphones and magnetic sensors have picked up similar anomalies. Pulses, hums, repeating vibrations embedded in the background noise of the planet itself. In 1997, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration captured a powerful underwater sound in the South Pacific, later nicknamed the bloop. The source was triangulated to somewhere near the Antarctic Peninsula. Publicly, it was explained as ice shifting a natural event. But the signal's profile was unusual. It repeated at intervals. It had a pattern. Enough to make some analysts quietly question whether it really was just ice. In 2008, a research team in Patagonia discovered a network of underground cavities while mapping glacial melt. At night, their instruments began picking up humming vibrations, moving sideways through the rock, not upward from below. The team leader, Dr. Luis Mendez, wrote in his field notes that the readings resembled distant generators. The data were sent back to a university lab classified as non-repeatable interference and shelved. Modern magnetometers sometimes detect faint alternating fields that appear and vanish with no connection to human technology. In 2013, the European Space Agency's swarm satellites recorded pulsing magnetic signatures beneath Antarctica's crust, repeating in a steady pattern roughly every 12 hours. The readings have never been fully explained. A NASA analyst looking at the data reportedly said the same phrase that keeps coming up in these stories. It looks artificial, but behaves natural. In other words, it could be a natural phenomenon that just happens to mimic engineered behavior, or it might be something else entirely. Echoes in ancient texts, long before modern machines, long before satellites and seismic maps, people were already describing something beneath their feet. Something that sounded mechanical. Sumerian tablets from the city of Eridu speak of the breath of Enki rising from the ground, described as a sound like copper wheels turning underwater. In the Rig Veda, one of India's oldest texts, there's a reference to a Nila, a hidden engine of the world, not a god watching from the sky, but a mechanism spinning beneath the earth's skin. Tibetan monks in the 12th century spoke of the Shankha, a perpetual device buried beneath Mount Kailash that sings when the world is out of balance. Its song was described as steady-timed, deliberate. Not like thunder, not like storms, like a machine. You could say this is just poetic language. People using mechanical metaphors to describe earthquakes or volcanic rumbles. But when the timing described in these texts is compared with modern vibration data, the cycles line up in eerie ways. The intervals match within small margins of error, as though they were observing the same repeating patterns with different words. In 2015, an American team drilling through the Ross Ice Shelf recorded electromagnetic pulses at exactly 7.83 hertz, the same frequency as the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth. But these pulses weren't smooth background noise. They showed complex modulations as if they were carrying information. The recordings were analyzed at McMurdo Station, then withdrawn. Internal notes allegedly contained one short line. The system is still active. A global lattice, If there really is some kind of ancient infrastructure below some kind of hidden network, how would anyone detect it? One way would be to look at how vibrations propagate through the planet. That's exactly what both governments and independent researchers began doing during the Cold War. Declassified fragments from the 1960s reference a joint Soviet-American initiative known as Operation Teledyne. Officially, it was a project to monitor seismic activity across the Pacific Rim, earthquake, prediction, tsunami warning, that kind of thing. Unofficially, both sides were interested in something more. The project placed resonance sensors across fault lines, San Andreas, Tonga, the Himalayas. A surviving diagram from 1967 shows a pattern emerging. The sensors and transmission points form a kind of grid, a lattice around the planet. When data from these sensors were plotted over time, tiny synchronized tremors showed up. Microquakes too small to feel occurring at almost the exact same moment across multiple continents. The delay between these microquakes was consistent with a signal moving not through the crust as a normal seismic wave, but through the core at a speed more like mechanical transmission. When the tremors were graphed, the pattern that emerged wasn't random. It looked like a faint repeating rhythm, a pulse that circled the globe. Some independent researchers scraped public seismic archives and repeated their own analyses, finding similar repeating intervals that didn't match typical tectonic behavior. Their conclusion: the Earth might be acting as a resonant body for an underlying system. Not necessarily a machine in the way we think of it, but something structured, something designed. Listening to the Earth, in 2021, a group of acoustic engineers decided to try something different. Rather than just relying on distant instruments and satellite data, they went somewhere intense, the Irazu volcano in Iceland. The volcano descends almost 400 feet into the Earth, and they lowered a low-frequency microphone array down into the shaft, far from the noise of the surface world. The array recorded constant oscillations, low mechanical tones repeating with clockwork regularity. The raw signal was below human hearing, but when they sped it up and converted it into the audible range, the sound was chilling. It resembled engines turning in the dark. Each cycle began with a rising hum, peaked, and then faded before starting again. Official reports labeled these as microseismic coupling events, vibrations caused by natural interactions between the ocean atmosphere and solid Earth. But once again, the repetition, uniformity, and persistence made some of the engineers uncomfortable. Nature is messy, chaotic. This wasn't. This was orderly. Geophysicists studying the core's electromagnetic properties openly acknowledge that Earth's magnetic field occasionally reverses, flipping polarity over thousands of years. During those transitions, the frequency of subterranean hums, those deep planet-wide vibrations, seems to increase. Ancient myths across multiple cultures describe such periods as ages of upheaval, times when the heart of the world beats faster. If there are machines beneath the crust, their purpose remains unknown. They could be relics of a civilization trying to regulate the planet's magnetic field. They could be part of a naturally evolved system that simply looks mechanical to us because we don't fully understand it. Or they could be something entirely beyond our current concepts of technology or geology. Every reading, every hum, every unexplained pulse points in the same direction. Something is still turning below us, unseen, unbroken, much older than our species. And whatever it is, it hasn't stopped. There's a legend that exists across nearly every culture. Not exactly the same everywhere, but close enough that it feels like a memory, like something that was real. and people kept talking about it long after it happened. It's the legend of a hidden kingdom, somewhere inside the earth. And the most striking detail about it is always the same. It glows, it shines, it produces its own light. In 1926, a Russian painter and explorer named Nicholas Roerich traveled through the Himalayas. He wasn't on a casual expedition. He was sponsored by the American Museum of Natural History. His journey took him across Tibet-Mongolia, through the Alai Mountains, following ancient trade routes that had always been tied to mythology. During his travels, his Tibetan guides kept mentioning the same place, Shambhala. They spoke of it as more than myth. They described it as an actual location, a hidden kingdom beneath the surface of the earth, radiating its own light. Roerich wrote in his journal that the monks described this world with complete certainty, not as spiritual metaphor, as geography. They called it a land of eternal brightness where the air trembles like gold and the soil glows beneath the feet. Roerich was trained as an ethnographer. He documented things carefully. But even in his formal notes, you can sense the impression these accounts made on him. He wrote, "They believe that its gates open only to those who walk without fear, not they imagine or they fantasize. They believe." Present tense, active conviction. The legend of a luminous world beneath the ground is far older than Roerich's time. You find it in texts that predate modern civilization. In the Mahabharata, one of India's oldest and longest texts, there are entire sections describing Nagaloka, a subterranean realm where serpentine beings guard cities of unimaginable architecture. These cities aren't lit by torches or oil lamps. They're lit by something else. The texts describe radiant crystals, stones that breathe fire without smoke. The Nagas, these serpent people, they were said to preserve ancient knowledge. Sealed away, hidden underground. They protected it because humanity had become corrupt, and this knowledge was too dangerous to remain on the surface where it could be misused. Similar ideas appear in early Christian mysticism. In the 4th century, a monk named Ephraim the Syrian wrote about a paradise hidden beneath the roots of mountains, a place where lamps never burn out, where rivers shine with their own radiance, not rivers reflecting light, rivers that emit light, literally shining from within. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition took this further. The Kalachakra teachings describe Shambhala not as a spiritual realm or a metaphor, as a physical place, hidden beneath layers of mountains and hidden beneath layers of time. According to these teachings, the capital city of Shambhala is called Kalapa, and it's illuminated by something called the central radiance. Not a sun, not fire, a radiance that needs no external source. It simply exists. It emanates. In the late 19th century, a Russian mystic named Helena Blavatsky published something that would influence occult and esoteric thought for decades. She wrote about an underground civilization with knowledge that predated human history, knowledge that had been carefully preserved. She connected this to the Tibetan legends of Shambhala, the Hindu descriptions of Nagaloka, and ancient texts from multiple cultures. What strikes you when you read these accounts is consistency. Not in every detail, but in the core imagery. Underground, civilization, light that comes from the world itself, not from an external source, and knowledge. Always knowledge, preserved, protected, waiting. The architecture of radiance. If an underground civilization actually existed, how would it create light? In a world without a sun, without access to the surface, what would power the radiance that so many legends describe? One possibility that modern researchers have speculated about involves bioluminescence on a massive scale. Organisms that produce light through chemical reactions engineered or cultivated to illuminate entire cities. Another involves harnessing geothermal energy, tapping into the heat of the planet's interior, and converting it into light through some technology we haven't yet discovered or rediscovered. But some of the oldest texts describe something even more interesting. In Sanskrit literature, there are references to something called vimanas of the inner sky, vehicles that move in silence through rock as if through air. The descriptions are vivid, crafts that don't require external propulsion. They navigate through solid stone effortlessly. A 12th century Tibetan chronicle actually names a specific route. It describes a passage from the surface monastery of Taparong downward into a lower city called Palma, the hidden land of peace. The text describes the journey in terms that suggest there are established paths, known routes, not random explorations, but established travel corridors maintained by those who understand them. Few modern explorers have dared to test these claims. The areas described in old maps have been sealed. Landslides have blocked passages. Floods have filled caverns. Or in many cases, governments have declared the regions restricted, off limits, no entry. But traces remain. Folklore echoes that hint at something real. A time when the earth wasn't viewed as a prison of solid rock, but as a layered world. A stratified reality with kingdoms stacked like forgotten pages in a book that nobody reads anymore. The glow beneath. There's something that keeps appearing in explorer accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries. Descriptions of luminescence. A glow. In caves, in underground chambers, coming from no visible source. In the 1880s, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce described entering a cavern system in Central Asia and encountering what he called a soft radiance emanating from the stone walls themselves. In his journal, he wrote that the light wasn't reflected. It wasn't coming from outside. The rock itself seemed to be producing it. He tried to document it, but found that his instruments couldn't measure it effectively. It was there, visible to his eyes, but it resisted quantification. In Peru near Cusco, local indigenous peoples spoke of caves where similar phenomena occurred. Chambers deep underground where the walls naturally produced light. Spanish conquistadors documented these accounts, though they attributed them to local superstition. But the consistency of the descriptions across different regions suggests something worth taking seriously. In China, Taoist texts describe what they call the luminescence of the inner sanctum. Again, light without visible source, existing in places that should be dark, places far beneath the surface. The purpose of preservation. If such a civilization exists or existed, what would be the motivation for hiding? Why go underground at all? The myths are unanimous on this point. A cataclysm, a global catastrophe. The surface became uninhabitable or unstable. The sky became hostile. The sun itself became a threat. And the civilization that possessed advanced knowledge that had developed far beyond what we can build today, they made a choice. They went down. They sealed themselves beneath the surface where they would be protected, where the temperature would remain constant, where the magnetic field of the planet would shield them from cosmic radiation or solar events. And they brought their knowledge with them, their archives, their understanding of technology and science that we've since forgotten. The legends say they've been waiting, watching, letting surface civilizations rise and fall in their own patterns. Occasionally, according to myth, their rulers, the king of the world, the high priests of Shambhala, the Nagas in their jeweled cities they step in. They appear at crucial moments when surface humanity is near collapse. They offer guidance, or they withdraw. They remain silent. They let us find our own path. What's fascinating is that this narrative appears independently in cultures that had no contact with each other. Native American traditions speak of ancestors emerging from underworld chambers. Pre-Columbian South American civilizations describe similar journeys. Aboriginal Australian traditions mention the Dreamtime realm beneath the earth. These stories echo across continents and centuries. Modern silence. In this 20th century, exploration of deep cave systems and underground regions became more systematic, more documented, and more controlled. When speleologists cave, scientists began exploring the most extensive underground networks. They started documenting unusual phenomena, temperature anomalies, magnetic variations. In some cases, vague accounts of luminescence that didn't match known mineral phosphorescence or bioluminescence patterns. But many of these findings remained unpublished or restricted. Research institutions began classifying certain cave exploration data. Archaeological discoveries in underground regions became subject to government oversight. Remote sensing data from beneath the surface started getting filtered before public release. It's as if once we developed the technology to actually look deep enough, once we could potentially find what the myths describe, the information stopped flowing freely. Access became restricted. Data became classified. The legends speak of gates that open only to those who walk without fear. Perhaps they also remain closed to those who ask too many questions. Or perhaps in our modern age, we've simply forgotten how to look. We've lost the capacity to see what's been there all along, waiting in the depths, glowing softly in the darkness beneath our feet. The light that needs no sun, the kingdom that never fell, the knowledge that was preserved when everything else was lost. It's still down there if the legends are true, still radiating, still waiting. Part 7. The structure of the underworld. Approximately 100 words. If there's a hidden civilization beneath the earth, it wouldn't just appear randomly. There would be structure, organization, a layout, an architecture that makes sense for sustaining life underground. And if we look at what modern geology has actually discovered, combined with what ancient texts describe, a picture starts to emerge, a blueprint for an impossible world. Let's start with what we know from geology. The Earth has layers, the crust on top where we live. Below that, the mantle, hotter, denser, mostly solid rock, but capable of flow over geological timescales. And beneath everything, the core molten iron and nickel, spinning in the darkness, generating the magnetic field that protects us all. But between these major layers, there are complications, anomalies. The crust itself isn't uniform. It varies in thickness. In some places, it's over 70 kilometers thick. In others, it's less than 7 kilometers. These thin spots could theoretically be access points, easier passages, weaker barriers. And within the mantle, seismic data has revealed something interesting: vast regions of lower density than they should be. Pockets, voids, areas where sound waves travel differently, suggesting hollow spaces or different material composition. Geophysicists call these LLSVPs large, low, shear velocity provinces. They exist beneath the Pacific Ocean, beneath Africa, beneath other regions. They're large enough to hold planetary scale structures. Ancient texts describing the underworld often mention a similar stratification, multiple levels, tiered worlds. The Hindu cosmology describes 7 underworlds, each with its own characteristics, its own inhabitants. The Tibetan traditions speak of nested kingdoms, one beneath the other. Even Dante's medieval vision of hell describes concentric circles descending toward a center. What if these descriptions, dismissed as mythology, were actually attempts to describe geological reality? What if they were sketching the actual structure of what lies below? The architecture of survival. To sustain a civilization underground, certain things would be necessary: air, water, food sources, temperature regulation, light, energy. For air, an underground realm would need either natural ventilation systems, cave networks with passages that allow air circulation, or artificial systems that recycle atmosphere. Ancient texts sometimes mention eternal winds that move through underground passages, not storms, consistent gentle currents. That sounds like engineered ventilation. For water, underground aquifers exist naturally. The planet is full of them. Vast reserves of fresh water beneath the surface. Some are still undiscovered. Some are tapped but unexplored fully. For food, there are multiple possibilities. Underground agriculture using geothermal heat and artificial light. Cultivation of fungi and other organisms that don't require sunlight. Or domestication of bioluminescent organisms for dual purposes, both food source and light source. For temperature, the deeper you go, the hotter it gets. But it also becomes more stable. No seasonal variation, no extreme swings. In the upper crust, just a few hundred meters down, temperature becomes constant. It's one of the reasons ancient peoples often lived in caves, the natural insulation. An advanced civilization would have understood this and built with it in mind. For energy, there are multiple sources. Geothermal power taps into the planet's internal heat. Tidal forces could be harnessed. Some esoteric texts hint at something else: energy drawn from the Earth's magnetic field itself. Conversion of electromagnetic currents into usable power. Technology that we haven't rediscovered yet, but that wouldn't violate any laws of physics. For light, we've discussed the possibilities. Bioluminescence. Harnessed geothermal radiation converted to visible light, or something more exotic that we haven't yet imagined. The Sumerian texts describe something called the Great Waters beneath, not just an ocean, but a system of water bodies at specific depths. The Vedic texts describe the city of 1,000 fountains, suggesting engineered water systems flowing through the underground kingdom. Irrigation, aquaculture, water management on a massive scale. The Network 1 detail that appears consistently in legends is the idea of connection. Not a single isolated kingdom, but a network. Multiple cities, multiple centers of civilization, connected by passages, by transportation systems. The Tibetan texts mention the route roads, pathways that extend from central locations outward toward what would be the edges of the underworld. The Peruvian traditions speak of the silver pathways beneath, suggesting metallurgical pathways, roads made of or containing metal. In 2019, satellite radar data from the European Space Agency revealed something striking. Linear voids beneath Antarctica's surface, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Their uniform width, approximately 300 meters, suggests they're not natural fractures. They look engineered. They look deliberate. Similar findings appeared in other locations. Beneath the Tibetan Plateau, geometric voids detected by magnetic imaging. Beneath the Amazon basin, symmetrical cavities that don't match known geological formation patterns. The data is sparse, interpretations vary, but the pattern is there. What if these aren't random geological features? What if they're remnants of an ancient transportation infrastructure, tunnels built to connect different underground cities, passages built to allow movement across vast distances while remaining underground? The measurements themselves are interesting. 300 meters wide is large enough to accommodate traffic, large enough for vehicles or creatures to pass through. Not so wide that it's naturally formed by ordinary geological processes. Power distribution. Any advanced civilization would need to distribute power across its cities. Electricity, heat, whatever energy source it relied on. This would require infrastructure, transmission systems, a grid. The declassified Operation Teledyne data mentioned earlier, the joint US-Soviet project mapping resonance patterns across the Pacific Rim. What if they weren't just mapping the patterns? What if they were detecting remnants of something that already existed? An ancient global power distribution system, still humming beneath the surface, still transmitting energy, still functioning in some diminished capacity. The 12-hour rhythm that keeps appearing in seismic data, in magnetic readings, in those ancient accounts of rhythmic pulses. What if that's not random? What if it's a fundamental operational cycle of whatever system remains active? Many power generation and distribution systems operate on cycles, on schedules. A 12-hour cycle would allow for energy storage and release, charging and discharging, building up power reserves and distributing them. It's efficient, it's elegant. It's exactly what you'd expect from an engineered system. The magnetic guardians. There's something odd about Earth's magnetic field. It protects us. It shields life on the surface from solar radiation. It keeps the atmosphere from being stripped away by solar wind. Without it, we wouldn't exist. But the magnetic field is generated by movement in the molten core, by convection currents of iron and nickel. It's not something that should require maintenance. It should be automatic, unless something is maintaining it, unless something is regulating it. Ancient texts sometimes mention the purpose of the underground kingdom as being specifically related to planetary maintenance. The Tibetan teachings describe the king of Shambhala as responsible for maintaining the balance between worlds, not just social balance or spiritual balance, actual planetary balance, magnetic balance, the reversals of Earth's magnetic field that happen over geological time, what causes them. Normally we blame the natural chaos of the molten core, but what if they're actually caused by fluctuations in an engineered system? What if, during periods of maintenance, during recalibration, the system temporarily powers down, allowing the field to flip? Ancient texts do describe such moments. Ages of chaos, times of upheaval, when the breath of the world becomes irregular, when the underground kingdom's systems are being adjusted, the interface points. If the underworld is real, there would need to be connection points to the surface, gates, as the legends describe them, access points, controlled entrances. The locations identified in various traditions are interesting. The poles north and south, where magnetic anomalies are greatest. The Himalayas, where several traditions place entrance cities. the Andes, where similar locations are described, the Nazca Plateau, where geometric structures have been found, certain cave systems like Mammoth Cave described as unusually large and organized. These locations share something in common. They're either magnetically anomalous or geologically unusual. Thin points in the crust, places where accessing deeper layers would be easier. Some researchers have proposed that the gates aren't permanent physical doors. They're locations where barriers are weaker, where access is possible for those who know how to look, where the boundary between surface and underworld becomes thinner. The descriptions of gates that open only to those without fear take on new meaning in this context. Not metaphorical courage, but actual knowledge. The ability to navigate the magnetic fields, the pressure systems, the environmental conditions that would make crossing from surface to underworld possible. Still operating. The most unsettling possibility is that all of this remains active. Not ruins, not abandoned cities, not machinery that stopped long ago, but systems that are still functioning, still maintaining the world above, still cycling through their operations on schedules measured in hours, days, and centuries. If that's true, then we're living in a world maintained by forces we don't understand, protected by systems we don't see, watched over by a civilization we've forgotten. The light beneath continues to shine. The machines continue to turn. The kingdom continues to exist, hidden in the layers of the world below, doing what it has always done, maintaining balance, preserving knowledge, waiting. There's a strange phenomenon in ancient texts, prophecies and descriptions that seem oddly specific. Too specific to be vague mysticism, too accurate to be random guessing. And when you start comparing these ancient accounts across different cultures that had no contact with each other, patterns emerge. Consistent patterns, detailed patterns, like they were all describing the same thing. Let's start with something concrete. The Vedic texts of ancient India don't just mention an underworld. They describe it with technical language. They reference something called the Anila, the hidden engine of the world. Not the world's heart, the engine, a mechanism. And they specify that it operates in cycles, in patterns, in ways that affect the surface world. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest existing religious texts, describes how this engine's operation correlates with ages of the world. There are periods of smooth operation, ages of stability, ages when the surface world flourishes. And there are periods of irregularity, ages when the breath of the world becomes restless, ages of upheaval, chaos, catastrophe. What's fascinating is that the timescales mentioned in these texts align with what modern geology tells us about Earth's history. The periods of magnetic instability, the reversals of the poles, the ice ages, the warm periods, the catastrophic extinction events. The texts describe them with remarkable consistency. The Hindu cosmology describes something called the yugas, vast ages, or epochs. Each yuga has specific characteristics. The Satya Yuga, the age of truth, is described as a period of stability and harmony. The Treta Yuga brings some challenges. The Dvapara Yuga brings more. And the Kali Yuga, the current age according to Hindu tradition, is described as an age of darkness and decline. An age when the underworld systems are struggling, when the balance between worlds is becoming strained. The interesting part, Hindu scholars traditionally date our entry into the Kali Yuga to around 3100 BCE. That's oddly specific, And if you look at what was happening on Earth around that time, climate shifts, the emergence of complex civilizations, signs of major geological change. It's not a bad starting point for a period of significant transition. The Tibetan Timekeeper. The Kala Chakra teachings from Tibetan Buddhism offer something even more detailed. They don't just mention an underworld kingdom. They describe it as actively managed, and they describe specific events that should occur at specific times. According to Kala Chakra tradition, the kingdom of Shambhala exists in a state of careful concealment. But there are moments when it becomes slightly more accessible, when the veils thin. These moments are tied to astronomical events, to cycles that can be calculated. The text describes something called the time of the Great Transition, a period when the underworld's influence on the surface world becomes more pronounced, when what's hidden begins to reveal itself. Not catastrophically, but gradually, inevitably. These descriptions match something else. The accounts of increasing geomagnetic anomalies that scientists have documented over the past 150 years. The magnetic field of Earth is currently weakening. That's measured fact. The poles are shifting. That's documented. And solar activity has been increasing in ways that affect planetary systems. The Tibetan texts suggest that during such periods, the hidden kingdom becomes slightly less hidden. Its presence becomes slightly more detectable. Its systems become slightly more visible to those looking carefully. The Sumerian archives. The Sumerian texts are even more explicit. They describe the Abzu, the domain beneath the ground, as a space of fresh waters and infinite knowledge. But they also describe it as being maintained by a specific entity. The god Enki, they call him. Not a god in the spiritual sense, but a being, a figure of immense knowledge and capability. Enki is described as the keeper of records. The Sumerian texts mention that he maintains archives in the Abzu, archives of knowledge, archives of history. Everything that humanity needs to remember is preserved there. Remarkably, the Sumerian accounts describe Enki as occasionally appearing on the surface world, not to the general population, but to selected individuals, to those who had demonstrated wisdom or worthiness. He would share knowledge, teach, explain, then return to the Abzu. The texts are very specific about Enki's relationship to water, springs, rivers, flowing water systems. Enki was said to control these, to regulate them. This is metaphorically interesting, but it's also technically interesting. Control of water systems would be crucial for an underground civilization. It would involve understanding hydrology on a sophisticated level, managing aquifers, directing flow, maintaining balance. The Andean connection. South American traditions, particularly from ancient Peruvian cultures, offer parallel accounts. They describe a civilization that preceded the Inca, the Tiahuanaco culture. And they locate this civilization center not just at a specific place, the ruins near Lake Titicaca, but extending below the surface. Peruvian legends speak of the Old Ones, who built the foundations of civilization, who constructed vast systems beneath the mountains, who possessed knowledge of stoneworking and construction that the later Inca admired but couldn't replicate. The Peruvian accounts mention specific locations as access points. Certain caves, certain lakes, certain mountains. The descriptions are geographic. They're pointing to actual places. And when modern geological surveys have looked at those places, they've found anomalies. Caves that extend deeper than expected. lakes that have strange properties, mountains that show signs of artificial modification. A particularly intriguing Peruvian legend describes something called the silver roads beneath. Not metaphorically silver, but actually containing silver or other metals. Roads made of refined material. The Nazca lines, those vast geometric designs etched into the Peruvian desert, might be surface markers pointing towards something below, or they might be maps. Viewed from above a vantage point you'd only have if you could fly, the patterns make sense. They're navigational, the prophecies of return. One element appears consistently in these ancient texts: a prophecy. Not of doom necessarily, but of revelation. A time when what's hidden will become known. A time when the surface world will finally understand what exists beneath. The Tibetan texts describe this as the opening of the gates. Not forced, not catastrophic, but an opening, a deliberate choice by the underworld civilization to reveal itself. The Hindu texts describe it as the transition between yugas, one age ending, another beginning. The transition periods are always chaotic, confusing, but necessary. The Peruvian traditions speak of the return of the founders, a time when those who built the original civilization or their descendants would return to the surface to guide humanity through a critical period. What's notable is that all these traditions place this revelation in the future, not the distant past. The future, our time, or soon, modern alignment. Here's where it gets really interesting. The modern anomalies that have been detected, the geomagnetic fluctuations, the seismic patterns, the satellite data, the electromagnetic signals, all of these are increasing in frequency and intensity. In the 1960s, the background magnetic field of Earth was stable and predictable. By the 1980s, anomalies were being detected. By the 2000s, the anomalies were becoming more pronounced. And by the 2020s, geophysicists are openly discussing the possibility of a magnetic field reversal. Not someday, potentially within centuries, or sooner. The seismic patterns that appear to have regular intervals, the 12-hour pulses, they're not constant. They're varying, increasing in frequency, becoming more pronounced. The satellite data showing geometric voids and linear structures beneath the surface, these discoveries are accumulating, more being found. Higher resolution imaging, revealing more details. It's as if something is becoming increasingly active, as if systems that were operating at low capacity for millennia are ramping up, increasing their output, becoming more visible. The ancient texts would call this the approach of the transition, the period when the underworld prepares to make contact, to reveal itself, to transfer knowledge, or to directly intervene in surface affairs. The waiting civilization. If we accept the premises suggested by these ancient texts and modern anomalies, then there exists beneath us a civilization that has been waiting, watching, maintaining the planet, preserving knowledge. They would have observed human history, seen us rise and fall, seen us repeat patterns, make the same mistakes. Occasionally they might have intervened, offered guidance, but mostly they would have let us develop according to our own path. But something is changing. Something is happening that's triggering a shift in their behavior, whether it's the approach of a magnetic reversal, the depletion of certain resources, a predetermined time cycle, or an assessment that surface humanity has reached a critical juncture, something is prompting them to become more active. The increasing geomagnetic anomalies might not be evidence of a dying system. They might be evidence of a system waking up, preparing, getting ready for something. The prophecies speak of revelation, of gates opening, of knowledge being shared, of the hidden becoming visible. And if we read the current data correctly, the increasing activity, the strengthening signals, the more frequent anomalies, then perhaps that time is approaching. Not in centuries, not in some distant mythological future, but now. Science has answers for most things. When something unusual appears in geological data, when anomalies show up in seismic readings, when satellites detect strange patterns, there are always explanations. Official explanations, peer-reviewed explanations, explanations that fit neatly into established models. The problem is that some of these explanations require stretching the models further and further, and some require ignoring data altogether. Let's start with what mainstream geology tells us about Earth's interior. The planet consists of distinct layers with different properties. The crust relatively thin and cold. The mantle hot and flowing slowly over geological time. The outer core liquid iron and nickel. The inner core solid iron under immense pressure. This model explains most of what we observe: earthquakes, volcanic activity, the generation of Earth's magnetic field. It works. It's been refined over decades. It's taught in universities worldwide. But when you start pointing to the anomalies, the zones of unexpectedly low density, in the mantle, the geometric voids detected beneath the surface, the synchronized seismic patterns, the regularly repeating electromagnetic pulses, the explanations start becoming more elaborate. The LLSVPs, those large, low-velocity regions beneath the Pacific and Africa, they're officially explained as areas of slightly different mineral composition, different temperature gradients, different densities. The models can accommodate them, barely. But the uniformity of certain underground voids, the geometric regularity of some detected formations, the mathematical precision of certain seismic patterns, these push harder against the boundaries of what random geological processes should produce. The resonance problem. One of the most difficult anomalies to explain is the Schumann resonance. Earth naturally produces an electromagnetic frequency of approximately 7.83 Hertz. This is the planet's baseline electromagnetic hum. It's detected everywhere. It's real. But in 2015, when American researchers in the Ross Ice Shelf detected pulses at exactly this frequency that shouldn't have been remarkable, the Earth naturally produces this frequency. Of course, it would be detected. Except these pulses were modulated. They weren't the simple background hum. They had structure, complexity, as if they were carrying information, as if they were being transmitted deliberately. The official response was that this was coincidental, that the detected pulses were simply natural Schumann resonance being picked up by sensitive instruments. No mystery, no reason to investigate further. But the modulation patterns were unusual. The complexity suggested design. And when independent researchers analyzed the data, they found repeating patterns that didn't match known natural variation. This is where the gap appears. Between what the data suggests and what the official explanations allow. The data says this looks engineered. The official response is it's natural. Trust us. Move on. The seismic synchronicity. The microquakes that appear to be synchronized across multiple continents, these are even more difficult to explain away. Earthquakes aren't supposed to be synchronized. They're random events triggered by stress in the crust. Tectonic plates shift. Pressure builds up. Eventually it releases. Unpredictable. Chaotic. Except when you look at global seismic databases and filter for very small earthquakes, the ones most people never notice, patterns emerge. Tiny tremors occurring at nearly identical moments across vast distances. The delay between them is consistent with mechanical transmission through the planet's core, not seismic wave transmission, which would follow well-known patterns. But something else. Something moving at a different speed through a different medium. Mainstream seismology explains this as coincidence, or as coupling between different regions through the mantle, complex interactions that just happen to produce this pattern. But coincidence at that scale, repeated consistently, starts to seem less like coincidence and more like signature, like evidence of something operating on a schedule, something systematic. The magnetic field question. The Earth's magnetic field is weakening. This is measured, documented, real. Geophysicists agree on this. The official explanation is that it's part of a natural cycle. The field has reversed many times in Earth's history. It's currently heading toward a reversal. During the reversal period, the field will be weak and chaotic. Then it will stabilize again in the opposite polarity. This explanation works. It's testable. It matches historical data from magnetized rocks and sediment layers. But there's a detail that doesn't quite fit. The current rate of weakening is faster than historical reversals, significantly faster. The field is declining at a rate that, if it continued, would see a reversal within centuries rather than millennia. Some researchers have proposed that something is accelerating this process. Not natural geomagnetic variation, but an external factor, or an internal factor that hasn't been accounted for. What if the systems maintaining the field, if such systems exist, are being adjusted? What if the period of weakening is intentional, deliberate, part of a larger plan? The official response doesn't address this possibility. It assumes natural processes. It doesn't consider that the field might be actively managed. The data gaps, one of the most striking things about deep Earth research, is how much data simply doesn't exist publicly, or exists but is classified, or exists but is never discussed in mainstream scientific literature. Geological surveys conducted by government agencies often yield data that never gets published. Military research into geophysics is classified. Satellite imaging of certain underground regions is restricted. Oil and gas companies conduct deep drilling operations and make discoveries they never report publicly. This isn't necessarily sinister. There are legitimate reasons for classified research: proprietary information, national security, economic interests. But it also means that any hidden structures, any anomalies inconsistent with accepted models, any evidence of engineered systems beneath the surface, these could remain hidden indefinitely. The public gets fragments. Enough to know something is odd, but not enough to form a complete picture. The alternative framework. Some researchers outside mainstream institutions have proposed an alternative framework, not rejecting accepted geology wholesale, but expanding it, allowing for the possibility that Earth's interior is more complex than standard models suggest. This framework acknowledges the LLSVPs, but interprets them differently, not just mineral variation, but possibly artificial structures, not enormous machines, but artifacts, infrastructure, evidence of engineering. It accommodates the regular seismic patterns as evidence of active systems rather than random geological noise. It interprets the electromagnetic anomalies as signals from something intentionally transmitting rather than natural phenomena. Under this framework, the ancient texts aren't mythology, they're history, accounts of a real civilization that built real structures beneath the surface, that developed real technology for surviving in that environment, that's still operating, still active. The problem with this framework is that it requires accepting evidence that mainstream science dismisses. Patterns that could be coincidence, anomalies that could have natural explanations. It requires a different standard of proof. The middle ground. There's a position between pure mainstream geology and full acceptance of underground civilization theories. A middle ground that acknowledges one Earth's interior is still not fully understood. We know less about what's below us than we know about the surface of the moon. There's enormous potential for discovery. 2. The anomalies being detected are real. Whether they have conventional explanations or not, they exist. They're measurable. They deserve investigation. 3 ancient texts deserve to be taken seriously, not as literal history necessarily, but as accounts that might preserve memories of real events, distorted by time and translation perhaps, but based on genuine observations. 4. There are gaps between what the data suggests and what official explanations allow. These gaps could be bridged by new information, or they could indicate that something is genuinely being hidden. 5. The implications are significant enough that they deserve serious study, not in secret military installations or classified corporate research, but openly, scientifically, with peer review and public accountability. The cost of certainty. There's a price to maintaining certainty, to declaring that we understand how the world works, to insisting that anomalies fit into established models. The price is that genuine discoveries might be missed, that evidence pointing towards something extraordinary might be ignored, that the truth, if it's something we haven't anticipated, might remain hidden. The alternative cost is the cost of entertaining too many possibilities, of chasing false leads, of seeing patterns where none exist, of believing in things that aren't real. Science is supposed to navigate between these extremes, follow evidence, test hypotheses, revise models when necessary. But it's also human. It's subject to institutional pressure, to career considerations, to the natural resistance to ideas that overturn established understanding. Somewhere between complete skepticism and complete belief lies the truth. And the data we have from seismic networks, from satellites, from deep boreholes, from historical accounts, all of it points towards something that our current models struggle to accommodate. Whether that something is an underground civilization or an aspect of planetary geology we haven't yet properly understood remains uncertain. But the uncertainty itself is the most honest place to stand. If it happened, if the gates opened, if the hidden civilization revealed itself, if contact became undeniable, what would that actually look like? How would it unfold? What would the first signs be? And more importantly, what would change? Let's think through this systematically. Contact with an underground civilization wouldn't necessarily announce itself. It wouldn't require a spacecraft landing on the White House lawn. It would be more subtle, more gradual, more deniable, at least initially. The first signs might be what we're already seeing: increasing seismic activity in specific locations, more frequent magnetic anomalies, changes in atmospheric conditions above known anomaly zones, phenomena that individual scientists could document and publish, but that wouldn't necessarily trigger mainstream attention. Then you'd likely see technological demonstrations, things appearing in the sky that defied conventional explanation. Not necessarily alien spacecraft, though that's how they'd be interpreted, but technology that worked according to principles we haven't mastered. Vehicles that moved without visible propulsion, structures that appeared suddenly fully formed without construction. The Tibetan texts describe something like this. They mention that when Shambhala's rulers decide to manifest on the surface, they do so gradually, first through subtle signs, then through more obvious demonstrations, testing humanity's readiness, assessing our response. The electromagnetic precursor, before any visible contact, you'd probably see escalating electromagnetic phenomena, not random, patterned, increasing in intensity and frequency. This could manifest as auroras at unusual latitudes and times. The northern lights appearing in places where they shouldn't. Not caused by solar activity, but by localized electromagnetic pulses from below. Power grid anomalies, unexplained surges and failures in electrical infrastructure. Localized at first, then spreading, demonstrating capability without causing catastrophic damage. Communication disruptions, interference with radio satellite cellular networks, demonstrating control over electromagnetic spectrum. These events would be attributed to solar activity, to geomagnetic storms, to technical failures. But they'd follow patterns, they'd intensify, they'd eventually become undeniable. The effect would be preparation without panic. The world would gradually realize that something was affecting electromagnetic systems. Something was interfering with our technology. Something was powerful enough to disrupt our modern infrastructure at will. The appearance. When visibility came, when something was actually seen, it would probably happen over a location with historical significance. One of the places mentioned in ancient texts as an entrance point. The Himalayas, perhaps, or Antarctica, or one of the sacred mountains in South America. The appearance would be ambiguous enough to be deniable. A light in the sky, an unusual formation, something that could be explained as weather phenomenon, as military aircraft, as optical illusion, at least initially. But the pattern would repeat. The same location, the same phenomenon, regular intervals, persistent, impossible to ignore indefinitely. Governments would mobilize. Military forces would be sent to observe. Scientists would be brought in to investigate. The location would be sealed off. No public access. Information controlled. But information has a way of leaking. Photographs, video, first-hand accounts from witnesses. The story would spread through unofficial channels, through internet, through word of mouth. The official narrative would be that it was misidentification, mass hallucination, attention-seeking fabrication. And some of the accounts probably would be fabrication. The signal would be buried in noise. But the core truth would persist. Something was there. Something was happening. The revelation, the actual revelation, the moment when contact became undeniable, when the hidden civilization made itself known openly, would probably come through communication rather than physical appearance. A signal, a message, transmitted on all electromagnetic frequencies simultaneously, in multiple languages, in mathematical language, in ways that made it impossible to deny that something intelligent was communicating. The message wouldn't necessarily be dramatic. It wouldn't necessarily be about revealing itself or explaining its existence. It might be something simpler, a statement, an announcement, a declaration of intent. Something like, "We have coexisted beneath your world since the last great transition. We have preserved knowledge. We have maintained balance. We are now preparing to make direct contact. We seek peaceful coexistence. We request representation in your governing bodies." Or it might be more mysterious, a mathematical proof that couldn't be generated by human mathematics, a formula that revealed new physics. Evidence that they were communicating, period, was itself profound. The announcement would trigger global response. United Nations emergency sessions, military mobilization, panic in some places, wonder in others, religious upheaval as people grappled with the implications. The knowledge transfer. If contact occurred peacefully, the next phase would likely involve knowledge transfer. The underground civilization preserving archives for thousands of years, ancient technology, scientific understanding that preceded our current knowledge. What might they share? Energy technology, methods for harnessing geothermal power on massive scales, perhaps even methods for accessing zero-point energy or other exotic power sources. Medical knowledge, biological understanding that could cure diseases we currently can't treat, genetic technology that could extend human lifespan dramatically, historical records, actual documentation of human prehistory, where we came from, how we developed, the role the underground civilization played in our emergence, technological blueprints, manufacturing processes that could revolutionize industry, astronomical knowledge, information about the cosmos, other civilizations, the true nature of the universe. The transfer wouldn't be instantaneous. It would be gradual, controlled, designed to integrate into human society without causing complete disruption. But over time, human civilization would be transformed. Our understanding would shift fundamentally. The geopolitical upheaval. Contact would shake every institution that currently holds power. Governments, religions, corporations, scientific establishments. Religious institutions would face their greatest challenge. How do you incorporate this into existing theology? Is this civilization divine? Are they demons? Are they simply another intelligent species? Different churches would reach different conclusions. Political systems would be destabilized. If an ancient civilization had been maintaining planetary systems, had been preserving knowledge, had capabilities far exceeding current human technology, then the current hierarchy of power would mean nothing. Nations that thought themselves dominant would realize they were living on a planet where another power had always existed, a power they couldn't threaten, a power that could protect itself easily. Economic systems would shift. Energy technology from the underground civilization would make current energy infrastructure obsolete. That's a massive wealth transfer, massive disruption. Scientific institutions would be humbled. Everything they claimed to know would need revision. Universities would become centers of learning from this new civilization. The entire framework of knowledge would have to be rebuilt. The integration. Eventually, assuming peaceful contact, there would be integration. The surface and underground civilizations would begin interacting openly. Trade, cultural exchange, possibly intermarriage. This would happen gradually. Humans wouldn't immediately be allowed to wander into underground cities. There would be protocols, boundaries, agreements about what could and couldn't be shared. The underground civilization would probably remain largely separate. They've been isolated for millennia. They wouldn't want to live on the surface suddenly. But there would be zones of interaction, neutral territories where exchange could occur. Humans would learn from them. They would learn from us. There would be culture shock on both sides. Eventually, you might see something like the Star Trek Federation scenario. Different intelligent species coexisting, trading, cooperating on larger projects, working together toward common goals. But first you'd have chaos, you'd have disruption, you'd have every institution that currently holds power scrambling to adapt to a reality it never prepared for. The alternative. Of course, contact might not be peaceful, or might not happen at all. The underground civilization might remain hidden indefinitely, or might decide that surface humanity isn't ready, that we've made too many mistakes, that it's not safe to reveal ourselves. In that scenario, we'd continue as we are, living above, never knowing what's below, never accessing the knowledge we could access, never understanding our true place in the world. The signals would continue. The anomalies would keep appearing. Scientists would keep finding evidence they couldn't explain. And the hidden civilization would continue its work, maintaining, preserving, waiting. Perhaps waiting for us to grow up, to become wise enough to be trusted with what they know, to demonstrate that we can handle the truth, or perhaps simply waiting for the next transition, for the next age to begin, for time to shift the relationship between surface and underworld once more. Part 11, The Hidden Archive. Approximately 100 words, governments know more than they're telling. That's not cynicism, that's pattern recognition. When you look at what's been classified, what's been restricted, what's been actively suppressed, a picture emerges. A picture of knowledge that exists but isn't being shared. Evidence that's been collected but isn't being disclosed. Let's start with what we know has been deliberately hidden. Not theoretically hidden, actually classified. Documented by researchers who've managed to piece together fragments. The Antarctic restrictions. Antarctica is protected by treaty. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty prohibits military activity and restricts civilian exploration. Sounds reasonable, sounds like environmental protection, but the restrictions go further than the treaty actually requires. Certain regions are completely off limits, no research allowed, no satellite imagery released, no information about what's actually there. Queen Maud Land, Wilkes Land. These regions keep appearing in anomaly reports. These regions are precisely where access is most restricted. Coincidence. In the 1970s, American satellite imagery of Antarctica showed something that got classified immediately. The images showed geometric formations beneath the ice, structures that didn't match known geology. The images were taken, then locked away, not released to the scientific community, not published, hidden. Why would satellite imagery of natural geological features be classified? Why would geologists be prevented from studying what's beneath Antarctic ice if it was just rock and mineral deposits? The answer suggests that what's there isn't natural, or that acknowledging it would raise questions nobody was prepared to answer. The deep drilling projects, the Kola, super deep borehole in Russia, the deepest hole ever drilled by humans, nearly 12 kilometers deep. It reached depths that no one had ever accessed before. The recordings from that borehole, the sonic signatures, the unexpected temperature, the anomalies those recordings were classified. The research data was sealed. Scientists involved in the project were instructed not to discuss findings publicly. Why? If it was just geological research, why the secrecy? The official story is that the project was abandoned because drilling became too difficult at those depths. The truth is likely more complex. Something was found, something that didn't fit the model, something that raised questions. Similar patterns appeared with other deep drilling projects. Oil companies drilling in remote locations, finding anomalies, keeping the discoveries quiet. The data stays proprietary, never makes it to the scientific community. If the Earth's interior contained vast engineered structures, vast underground cities, vast infrastructure of non-natural origin, how would you hide it? You'd restrict access to the regions where evidence existed. You'd classify the data collected by deep drilling. You'd control satellite imagery. You'd prevent independent researchers from investigating. That's exactly what's happened. The magnetic field studies. In the 1960s and 1970s, both the United States and Soviet Union conducted extensive magnetic field research. Operation Teal'dine, that joint project we mentioned earlier, it was real. The data it collected was real. But that data was compartmentalized. Scientists who worked on it were restricted from sharing findings publicly. They signed agreements. They were bound by security clearances. What did they find? We don't know. The data is still classified. Decades later, it remains sealed. Why would measurements of Earth's magnetic field pose a security threat? Unless those measurements revealed something inconsistent with accepted models, unless they suggested that the magnetic field was being actively regulated, unless they provided evidence of structures or technology that shouldn't exist. In the 1980s, when civilian satellite technology improved, governments moved to restrict that technology. Imaging resolution was limited. Certain regions were declared off-limits. The ability of independent researchers to map Earth's surface was deliberately constrained. The official reason was national security, protecting military installations, preventing reconnaissance by hostile nations. The actual reason might have been preventing discovery of what lay beneath the surface. The seismic networks, modern seismic networks, are supposed to monitor earthquakes, to provide early warning of dangerous tremors, scientific infrastructure for public safety. But seismic data is also highly controlled. Not all of it is publicly available. Certain data is restricted. Certain analyses are classified. When researchers detected those synchronized microquakes, the tiny tremors occurring simultaneously across vast distances, that data was there. The patterns were visible, but discussion was limited. The findings weren't widely publicized. Why, if it was just an interesting geological phenomenon, why not publish? Why not let the scientific community study it? Because the pattern was too regular, too consistent, too suggestive of something engineered. And acknowledging that pattern would raise questions that governments weren't prepared to address. The expedition records, historical exploration records from Antarctica, the Arctic, the deep mountains, many of these have been restricted or lost. Admiral Byrd's complete diaries, not publicly available, sealed away. Why would personal journals from a polar explorer be classified military documents? Because they contained observations that contradicted the accepted narrative. Because they suggested things that couldn't be admitted. The records from early polar expeditions are spotty, some detailed, some suspiciously vague, some clearly edited or redacted. Why what information was being removed? The accounts of unusual geological features, of anomalies, of phenomena that didn't match expected observations. These wouldn't need to be hidden if they were just natural variation. The corporate secrecy. Private companies conducting resource extraction mining, oil drilling, geothermal exploration. They find things. They find anomalies, unexpected structures, unusual mineral deposits, phenomena that don't match geological models. What do they do with this information? They keep it proprietary, trade secret, competitive advantage. But they also don't publish it. They don't share it with the scientific community. They don't let independent researchers study it. Why? Because if the anomalies were widespread enough, if the patterns were clear enough, someone might notice. Someone might start asking questions that couldn't be answered. The data stays locked away in corporate archives, accessible only to employees, never released, never studied by independent scientists. Over decades, a massive amount of deep Earth data has been collected and hidden, not by government conspiracy alone, by a combination of government restriction, corporate proprietary interests, and institutional pressure to maintain accepted models. The cost of secrecy. Hiding this information has a cost. It prevents legitimate scientific research. It prevents the development of technology that might be possible if we understood Earth's interior better. It creates a gap between what's known and what's acknowledged. That gap allows misinformation to flourish. Conspiracy theories proliferate precisely because real information is hidden. People speculate wildly because genuine data isn't available. It also prevents humanity from making informed decisions about our future. If there are systems maintaining planetary stability, if there's technology that could solve our energy problems, if there's knowledge that could transform our civilization, hiding all of it keeps us ignorant. Scientists who want to investigate anomalies face institutional pressure. Universities that publish heretical research lose funding. Researchers who challenge accepted models find grants disappearing. Career advancement becomes impossible. The system is designed to suppress investigation into anything that suggests the Earth's interior is more complex than the accepted model allows. What might be hidden? We can speculate based on the patterns of restriction-advanced ancient technology. Evidence that civilizations before recorded history possessed capabilities we're only now developing. Living underground cities. Actual infrastructure that's still occupied, still functioning, still active. Evidence of non-human intelligence. Either the underground civilization or potentially visitors from elsewhere that have established bases beneath the surface. Energy technology. Methods for harnessing power that would make current energy infrastructure obsolete. Biological discoveries. Species living underground. Organisms with properties that challenge our understanding of biology. Historical records. Documentation of human prehistory that contradicts accepted timelines. Astronomical knowledge. Information suggesting that our understanding of the cosmos is incomplete. Any combination of these would explain the secrecy. Any of these would justify restricting information. Any of these would transform human civilization if revealed. The burden of keepers, the people who know the scientists involved in classified projects, the government officials with security clearances, the corporate executives aware of findings they can't share, they carry a burden. They know something is being hidden. They can't speak about it. They can't publish their findings. They can't contribute to the advancement of human knowledge in their field because the knowledge they possess is restricted. Some deal with this through compartmentalization. They tell themselves that secrecy is necessary, that humanity isn't ready, that revealing the truth would cause panic. Others struggle with the burden. They see the harm caused by suppression. They see the scientific progress that's being prevented. They see misinformation flourishing in the gap created by official silence. Some of them leak. Some release information anonymously. Some write books under pseudonyms. Some leave hints in declassified documents. The evidence exists. The knowledge exists. It's not gone. It's just hidden, carefully, systematically, intentionally. But hidden things eventually emerge. Truth has a way of surfacing, not immediately, not dramatically, but persistently, inevitably. We've traveled deep, through legend and geology, through classified records and ancient texts, through the signals that echo beneath our feet and the silence of official denial. Now we need to ask the final question: what does this mean, and what comes next? The evidence, when you gather it all together, points in a single direction. Something exists beneath the surface of our planet, something intelligent, something organized, something that's been here far longer than human civilization, and something that's preparing to make itself known. Whether that something is a remnant of a previous human civilization, an entirely separate, intelligent species, or something. We don't yet have words to describe. The answer matters less than the fact of its existence. The convergence. What's remarkable is how the pieces fit together. The ancient texts from multiple cultures describing the same kingdom. The modern anomalies detected by instruments that didn't exist when those texts were written. The historical accounts of explorers encountering phenomena that didn't match expected geology. The classified data suggesting that governments know more than they're revealing. These aren't isolated threads. They're part of the same tapestry. A tapestry depicting a reality that's been carefully concealed but which is becoming harder to hide. The magnetic field is weakening. The seismic patterns are intensifying. The satellite data is accumulating. The historical records are becoming more widely accessible as document repositories go digital. The internet makes it harder to keep information completely secret. The hidden is becoming visible not through dramatic revelation, but through the slow accumulation of evidence. Through the inability to maintain silence indefinitely. Through the natural tendency of truth to find the light. We're at a convergence point, a moment when what's been hidden is becoming impossible to continue hiding. Not because someone dramatically revealed it, but because the evidence is overwhelming. Because too many independent researchers have found too many consistent anomalies. Because the gaps between accepted models and observed reality have become too large to ignore. The threshold. If contact is coming, if the gates are opening, it won't happen all at once. It will happen in stages. Each stage will push the boundary of what's acceptable to acknowledge slightly further. First, the anomalies will become too significant to ignore. Governments will issue statements acknowledging that unusual phenomena are being detected. Scientists will publish papers about seismic patterns and magnetic variations. The official narrative will shift from "there's nothing unusual" to "we're investigating unusual phenomena." Then physical evidence will become undeniable. Something will appear in multiple locations simultaneously. Something that can't be explained away as misidentification or natural phenomenon. The public will demand explanation. The governments will have to provide it or lose credibility entirely. Finally, direct communication will occur. a signal, a message, an undeniable attempt to establish dialogue from something intelligent that exists beneath the surface. Each stage will require psychological adjustment. Humanity will need time to process, to accept, to integrate the knowledge into our understanding of reality. But the trajectory is clear. We're moving toward revelation. The only question is how quickly it happens and how gracefully we manage the transition. The preparation. What should humanity be doing to prepare? Several things. 1, studying the ancient texts seriously, not dismissing them as mythology, taking them as accounts of history, comparing what they describe with what we're discovering. The knowledge they contain might be crucial. 2, demanding transparency from governments, declassifying the research, making the data public, letting independent researchers study what's been hidden. The information belongs to humanity, not to security agencies. 3, preparing institutions for transformation. Religions need to think about how to incorporate this into theology. Educational systems need to consider how they'll teach a completely revised history. Economic systems need to prepare for technological disruption. 4, developing protocols for contact. What would we want to communicate? What would we want to know? How would we establish mutually beneficial relationship and remaining calm? Panic serves no one. Preparation. Thoughtfulness and rational planning do. The opportunity. If the underground civilization is real, if contact becomes possible, this represents an extraordinary opportunity. Not a threat necessarily, an opportunity. We could gain knowledge that would take us centuries to develop independently. We could solve problems we currently consider unsolvable. We could understand our place in the cosmos. We could access technology that would eliminate scarcity in energy. We could transform human civilization fundamentally, but only if we approach it with wisdom. Only if we respect the civilization that's been waiting beneath us. Only if we approach contact with humility rather than arrogance. The underground civilization has had millennia to develop. They've been maintaining planetary systems. They've been preserving knowledge. They've been waiting. They're not primitive. They're not less advanced than us. They're far more advanced. The opportunity is for mutual enrichment, for 2 intelligent species coexisting, for knowledge exchange, for the next phase of human development to begin. The burden of knowledge. But there's a burden that comes with this knowledge. Once you've seen the evidence, once you've understood what might be beneath us, you can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. The people who've dedicated their lives to investigating these mysteries, the researchers, the explorers, the historians, the scientists, working outside mainstream institutions, they carry that burden. They've seen something that contradicts the official narrative. They've encountered evidence that the authorities don't want discussed. Some have paid a price. Careers derailed, funding cut off, reputation damaged. The institutional system is designed to punish those who question foundational assumptions. But they continue investigating. They continue publishing. They continue searching for truth. Because the truth matters. Because what's hidden needs to be revealed. For those reading this, the burden becomes yours as well. Once you've considered this evidence, once you've entertained the possibility that something intelligent exists beneath our feet, that knowledge changes how you see the world. It changes what questions you ask. It changes what you're willing to accept from official sources. That can be uncomfortable. It can create cognitive dissonance. It can lead to frustration. when you try to discuss these ideas with people who haven't engaged with the evidence. But it's also liberating. It's freedom from unquestioned acceptance of official narratives. It's the ability to think critically about what we claim to know. The next phase. What comes next depends on choices we make, individually and collectively. If we continue denying the evidence, if we continue suppressing investigation, if we continue hiding the data, then the revelation will come as shock, as disruption, as chaos potentially. But if we choose to engage seriously with this possibility, if we choose to investigate openly, if we choose to prepare for contact, then the transition could be managed. Thoughtful, transformative rather than traumatic. The underground civilization, if it exists, seems to prefer the gradual approach. The ancient texts suggest revelation happens slowly, testing humanity's readiness, assessing our response, preparing us for what comes next. That's wise. That's patient. That honors the reality that we're not ready for sudden revelation. We need time to process, time to adjust, time to prepare our institutions and our minds. The choice before us, we stand at a threshold. Behind us is an age of ignorance. Ahead is an age of knowledge, an age where what's hidden is revealed, an age where humanity understands its true place in the world. That age is coming. The signals are accelerating. The evidence is accumulating. The gates are opening. The choice isn't whether revelation will happen. It's whether we'll face it with wisdom or with fear, with preparation or with panic, with openness or with denial. The civilization beneath our feet has waited millennia. They've maintained our planet. They've preserved knowledge. They've watched as we rose and fell and rose again. Now they're preparing to reveal themselves, to make contact, to share what they know. The question is, are we ready to receive them? Are we ready to learn? Are we ready to grow beyond what we currently understand? The machines beneath the crust continue their patient work. The light beneath still shines. The archives still hold their secrets. The kingdom waits, but the waiting is ending. The revelation is beginning. The age of what's hidden is giving way to the age of what's known, and we are the ones who will live through it. We are the generation that will witness the opening of the gates. We are the ones who will have the opportunity to meet the civilization that never left, that never stopped, that was always here beneath us, maintaining the world, preserving the knowledge, waiting for the right moment to say hello. That moment is approaching. Can you feel it, the hum beneath the surface? The signals increasing in frequency, the patterns becoming more undeniable. Something is waking up, something is preparing, something is ready to emerge. And whether we're ready or not, whether we've prepared or remained in denial, whether we've listened to the evidence or dismissed it, the gates are opening. The kingdom of light waits beneath our feet. And soon, very soon, we'll have no choice but to acknowledge that we were never alone. That the world above has always been watched over by a world below. That history is about to change. The revelation is coming. The question is only, will we be ready to receive it?